I want to talk today about kind of what we're seeing in the economy, and it's been, to be perfectly frank, pretty challenging for my team. I think the last several years going through COVID and kind of figuring out what the recovery is going to look like. And now we're kind of facing a whole bunch of different risks, and we're sort of in the process of getting ready for our budget. So our budget's it has to be released by the end of February. And so we're kind of in the throes right now of looking at all of our assumptions and trying to make sense of what's happening in the markets. There's been so much volatility out there, and so that's really been a challenge for us in kind of trying to figure out where we're going. The positive story for Alberta, I'm going to talk today, so the theme of my presentation is about how we expect Alberta to sort of weather the storm. So there are a lot of risks out there right now, especially with the global economy. And so I'm going to talk today about kind of where we see Alberta positioned and how we think, because we think that Alberta is actually going to fare fairly well, especially compared with other jurisdictions, through some of these challenges that we're seeing. And so that's really the big theme for today's presentation. Heading out of COVID and into last year, it was definitely a recovery year for the province, and we saw a lot of momentum building in the economy. And so we saw a real turnaround in investment intentions. We're continuing to see announcements with companies moving forward with investments. We haven't seen, despite some of the challenges around rising costs, supply chain bottlenecks, all of those things, we haven't seen companies really pull back on their investment intentions. And so that's something that we see really carrying the economy into this year. The other piece that is really important, particularly last year, was that we saw huge growth in incomes in the province, especially on the corporate side. And so we sort of measure incomes broadly as nominal GDP in sort of economic speak. And so it's a measure of sort of all the income economy from companies, households, government. And we saw nominal GDP, we figure it grew about 24% last year. So it hit a record high, and a lot of that was being driven by corporate profits. And so that sets up companies quite nicely heading into this period of what we consider pretty high risk, especially with what's going on in the global economy. And so, last year we figured that GDP, real GDP grew about 4.8%. And so we think that some of that momentum is certainly going to carry into this year, especially on the investment side. So where we see things now, of course, we're expecting growth to slow this year, just given some of the risks, especially for consumers, the fact that they're facing higher costs, interest rates are rising, things like that. But really, we see some very strong fundamentals in the province. So we've seen very strong population growth. We have a young demographic here in the province. We have a lot of people participating in the labor force. So we see very strong fundamentals that we think are going to carry us through some of these headwinds that we're seeing. But of course, I need to talk about the risks that are out there. And so I mentioned up front, it's been challenging for us to try to figure out where things are going this year. And so I'm going to talk a bit about where we see the biggest risk and how we've incorporated that into our forecast. This is a bit of a busy slide, but I do want to talk a bit about what's happening globally, because that's where a lot of the risk is coming from. This is the Global Purchasers Manufacturing Index, and it's kind of an indication of where manufacturing activity and service activity has been going. And so we've seen in the last 6 to 8 months steady weakening of some of that activity globally. So we're seeing a slowdown on the service side as well as the manufacturing side, and that's really important for us, especially when we look at oil demand, demand for products, things like that. So we've seen that gradual slowing and pulling back in activity globally, as well as sort of this constant realignment of expectations for global growth. So we've seen global growth downgraded for Canada, the US. There's some recession talk. We might see a recession in the first couple quarters of this year, given some of the risks on the household side. Activity in China, they're still, they've shifted gears on their COVID policy, but there's still a lot of challenges to growth there. And so overall, we've seen this sort of downgrading of global growth expectations. And we continue to see that. Of course, the other piece is this talk about inflation. And we are in headline terms, we are starting to see inflation. So it looks like it, peaked late last year. We are starting to see it coming down. So even in December, inflation in Canada and the US, headline inflation has, turned downwards. A lot of that is due to the energy. So we have seen a pullback in energy prices. So taking out some of those volatile factors like food and energy, what we call core inflation is still quite high. So, above 5% range. And that's really what drives expectations for things like wages, sort of overall costs going forward. And so, it's going to take a while, we think, before we see some of that core inflation coming down. But certainly we are seeing the numbers going in the right direction. I think the challenge is especially on the services side, where we've seen goods, consumers, they pull back on their spending. They're not going to buy a car. They might not buy a sofa, whatever. But there's still demand for services. And so that's where we're also seeing some ongoing inflation. The good thing is that we are starting to see inflation kind of move down and the Bank of Canada actually in their announcement last week acknowledged that as well, that inflation is starting to ease off and they're kind of going to sit and wait and see what happens in terms of raising interest rates. So the other piece that's really important in terms of the outlook is how consumers have responded. And this is a bit of a technical graph as well, but I wanted to highlight that consumers have pulled back, and we see that through the data. And so we've seen steadily slower consumption, especially as a contribution to GDP. And so consumers have retrenched. They've already responded to these higher interest rates and some of the uncertainty that's out there. And we're seeing that through the data. And there is an expectation, I mentioned, talk of potential recession in the first or second quarter. That's going to be driven by consumers and consumer spending if we continue to see consumption slow. And we see a very similar trend for Alberta, but we also see some offsetting factors that we think are going to support growth. So the other piece that we look at is the dollar, which is important for Alberta's economy and an important factor for revenue. And last year, even though we saw oil prices really high at some points, we didn't see the dollar, last time oil was at $100, the Canadian dollar was almost at par with the US. So we didn't see that same response this time around with the exchange rate. And so really that was more of a US dollar story than a Canadian dollar story. So the US dollar benefited from some of the uncertainty around interest rates, sort of a flight to safety, as well as an expectation that the US Fed would be quite aggressive. And so now we're starting to see some of that US dollar strength coming off, and so we're seeing the Canadian dollar picking up a little bit. And so we do expect this year the dollar is going to be around 75 cents, which is still supportive of export activity. It's still supportive of revenue in the province, but certainly a little bit stronger than what we saw last year. So oil prices, forecasting oil is a very tricky business, I can tell you. Last year, of course, when we came into budget, we were fairly conservative with our oil price assumptions. We were concerned about demand risk. There was a lot of uncertainty about COVID, things like that. And we did come in quite conservative. And of course, on the day that our budget was released was actually the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. And that really kind of blew things out of the water, of course, in a lot of fronts, not just on oil prices. And so, that really changed the trajectory, especially of our revenues last year. And we had record, for the province, we had record levels of non-renewable resource revenue, but it basically pushed up the whole price complex across the board. And so now we've been spending a lot of time in the last few months trying to understand, with all of this recession talk, all of these, people talking about challenges with demand and slowing growth, like what does that actually mean for prices? So we're in an environment right now where inventories are still quite low. And even though demand is slowing, it's still, fairly decent. And so when we're looking at oil prices, we're trying to sort of balance some of those factors. And so this year, and stay tuned for kind of where we land for budget, but even in our mid-year, we were looking at price of around $80 for this year, and then moving down to between $70 and $75 over the medium term. So we're definitely not looking at, the $100, $110 oil that we saw early in 2022. But certainly prices are still going to remain, in our view, supportive of activity in the province. So even a price of $75 is a good price, especially with a 75-cent exchange rate. And so, that's kind of where our thinking is, and our expectation is that the market is, even if we see demand ease, the market is going to sort of unwind some of these supply risks slowly over time. So prices are going to remain supportive of activity in the province. So kind of where are we at? Where do we stand for Alberta? My team, we have challenges. We get GDP data. It's actually a year lagged. And so we just got GDP data for 2021 in November of last year. And so we developed an Alberta Activity Index, and it's available on our website, and it actually tracks GDP fairly nicely. And so what we saw was, a pretty strong rebound coming out of COVID, and a really strong rebound in activity. And then kind of since about maybe mid-2022, just kind of holding steady. And that's a reflection that, especially consumers, were already starting to feel some of those risks around higher costs, higher interest rates, things like that. And so we saw a really nice, strong rebound in business sector activity, which is, I mentioned up front, it was really driving our revenue gains from last year. As well as we saw some decent labor market gains, but really on the household side, we saw, retail sales were kind of holding steady, not really posting a lot of growth, especially compared with prices. So we started to see some of those things kind of percolating through the economy and through activity. But generally speaking, activity has held up, and it held up even through the end of last year. So that speaks to some of the momentum that we're talking about. So, in terms of, from a business perspective, when we look at output, we hit 4 million barrels a day of production in November, which is a record for Alberta. We saw growth on the price front, but we also saw some volume gains across the board in most commodities. So on the petrochemical side, on the chemical side, wholesale trade really picks up. On the wood products manufacturing, agri-foods, basically across the board we saw strength. And so, our exports grew about 60% last year, and we saw about a 30% increase in manufacturing shipments. So really broad-based strength, and that was supported by high prices. And so, that suggests that companies are in a really good position heading into this year in terms of managing and being able to sort of weather the storm a little bit. And that is a big story, especially for energy companies, given some of the risks out there. The other piece that we've been trying to get a handle on is on the cost side. And I mentioned that we have seen investment intentions pick up. We saw Imperial announce they're going to be building the biodiesel plant. They're targeting 2025 for that. We've seen announcements on the manufacturing side. We've got some agri-food stuff on the go. And so companies have announced intentions, but they are facing higher costs. We have to forecast cost growth in our model, and when we look at the overall economy. And we were looking at, our non-residential index grew over 10% last year. So that's significant in terms of the costs that businesses are facing. So this year, we were looking at we were figuring around another sort of 5% increase in costs for businesses. And so they have been, and we have heard companies haven't necessarily been doling out higher wages, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but they've been trying to manage their costs in a lot of different ways. The good thing is, though, we have started to see, supply chain bottlenecks are starting to normalize. We've seen shipping costs come back down. We've already started to see some of those energy prices come back down. And so the good news is that those prices are retreating. And so, even though we've seen higher costs, certainly companies, we don't expect to be kind of where we were last year when we're looking at the double-digit cost increases, which is a positive sign from an investment perspective. So what does our investment outlook look like right now? People talk about diversification in Alberta. It's something that we've talked about for the last 40 or 50 years. Is our economy diversified? Challenges with the energy sector kind of dwarfing other industries. And what we have seen since the 15-16 recession, of course, we saw a big pullback in energy sector investment, and that was partly a function of where companies were at in the cycle, right? We saw this huge wave of oil sands building. Companies spent 15 years building these massive projects, started to wrap those up. We started to see that production coming online, but we also saw a huge pullback when we saw the price crash in 15-16. And so since then, we've seen kind of a shift in the composition of our overall investment. And we actually see more investment coming from industries outside of oil and gas. And so even though we certainly are expecting a pickup in spending. We've seen drilling, rigs drilling is at the highest level since pre-15-16. So conventional companies are spending a bit more money. On the oil sands side, we've discussed, or we've heard a lot about companies sort of hoarding their cash. They are focusing on paying back their debt, building shareholder value, but they're also looking at things like CCUS and transition spending and investment in technology. And so our forecast here doesn't incorporate, we're still trying to get a handle on what we think that CCUS spending is going to look like. But certainly we are seeing increased spending on the oil and gas side, but really where we're seeing a lot of the new spending is outside of oil and gas. So on the agri-food side, petrochemicals, renewable energy, there's tons of stuff going on, and we've seen, even in Calgary, the tech sector has really taken off. So we see a lot of investment opportunities and intentions outside of oil and gas, and so really that shifted the composition of our investment. And so we're looking at, industries outside of oil and gas contributing more than 50% to overall investment. So I think that's a really positive story for the province, especially from that diversification view. I talked a lot about sort of where we think some of the momentum is coming from, the fact that we see strong investment intentions. I want to talk a little bit about the labor market and what we think the biggest risk is this year, which is on the household spending side. We contributed last year about 20% of overall private sector jobs in Canada were created here in Alberta. We've seen some momentum in the labor market and basically across the board. So even some of those sectors that lagged, coming out of COVID, accommodation and food services, information and culture, some of those industries that were hit hard by some of those public health measures and, the high contact type stuff, we've even seen recovery in those industries. So overall, there's quite a bit of momentum in Alberta's labor market, and that's also true for Canada. And so we think that the fact that the labor market has some tightness in it right now is actually going to provide a cushion with a potential slowdown in activity for Canada overall this year. One of the challenges, though, and I'm sure probably at the local level, it's something that folks hear a lot about, and we've received a lot of feedback at the province, with hiring challenges. And we've seen, a fairly tight labor market, people talking about skills mismatch, not being able to find qualified workers. So that has been a challenge. And one of the biggest reasons for that we see is the fact that we saw this really, really big exodus of older workers leaving the labor market during COVID. And that's just not for Alberta. We've read about it for Canada, for the US, pretty much all jurisdictions. And in Alberta, we have very high participation in the labor market across all age cohorts, including older workers. They tend to stay here longer. Wages are higher here, earnings are higher, but we haven't seen them come back from COVID since we saw that exodus. And so that is creating some challenges in terms of overall labor supply. One of the other things we've also seen is it hasn't been equal across all regions. So folks outside of Edmonton and Calgary that say, hey, we're having trouble. And so, we've finally seen the recovery in employment outside of Edmonton and Calgary, but we continue to see some labor market tightness. One of the interesting things is that usually you would expect, where there's a lot of labor market tightness, that you would expect to see a wage response. And certainly across Canada, we saw that. So we saw wages grow quite strongly last year in Canada. We didn't see that same strength in Alberta. So wages grew, in Canada over 5%. In Alberta, they grew between like 1 and 2%, which is a bit of a surprise for us, given, you know, the amount of job vacancies out there and sort of the stories we're hearing about labor shortages. And so we wanted to kind of understand a little bit more about maybe why that was. I think part of it is that companies have been trying to manage their costs through maybe other incentives besides just offering higher wages. Because once you get the higher wages, then the inflation becomes more entrenched in the economy. So, you know, companies trying to manage some of their other costs. But when we looked at some of these other factors and trying to understand what was happening with the wages, what we found is that in Alberta, we actually have seen a bit of a substitution between older and younger workers. So our job tenure is a little bit lower here compared with other provinces. And so obviously if you're paying a young worker who's just getting in, you're not going to pay them as much as someone who's got 30 years of experience. So our job tenure is a bit lower here. We also didn't see the same kind of wage growth in some of the professional scientific services, construction sector that we saw in other parts of the country last year. We also didn't see as much wage growth in particularly areas related to like healthcare and education, which could be a result of the fact that the province just went through a lot of bargaining in the last year and a half. So, you know, a few factors there that prevented or kept a lid on wage growth in the province compared with other jurisdictions. Our expectation is that companies are going to have to respond if they want to attract those workers. And we've heard a lot about folks coming to the province, and so there's, you know, companies are being aggressive, and so we expect to see stronger wages this year. We also expect participation to improve, which we might see higher unemployment as a result, so our unemployment rate might creep up a little bit, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. We want to see that participation. We want to see people moving into the labor force. So our expectation is actually that our unemployment rate is going to go up this year a little bit as we see people coming into the province or coming into the labor force. So for us, there's kind of that natural adjustment that we think is going to happen over the next few years. For Budget 2022, we launched an Alberta at Work strategy that's meant to address some of the skills mismatch. So there's a lot of money that was put towards things like apprenticeships and training and things like that. So we do expect some of those programs to, you know, show some results over the next few years as well and support some of that entry into the labor market. But on the wage side, we do think that we're going to see stronger wage growth this year as the province. Population. We care a lot about population when we're forecasting because it's a big driver of our potential output over the long term. And Alberta has very, very favorable demographics. And we saw probably like mid last year, we started to see a real turnaround in our population growth. And so what happens in Alberta, we have a young workforce and it's very mobile. And so when things aren't going well in the province, people tend to leave. And when things are going really well, people tend to come back. And so we saw that happening starting about mid last year. We started to see really big numbers, especially interprovincial migration, so people coming from other provinces to Alberta. Actually, at the end of the year, we saw the largest level increase in population that we've ever seen. So we're looking at population growth over 3%, combined with, you know, the higher targets on the immigration side with the federal government, as well as interprovincial migration. So I think people are sort of asking, it's really difficult, you know, with the numbers that we get. People are like, well, what do you think is driving that? Because there is certainly a story about affordability, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in relation to the housing market, and I think that is a story. But I also think that the underlying strength in terms of investment intentions and the job prospects here are drawing people to the province. And I wouldn't expect, you know, way back in 2010, we heard of a lot of people who would come to the province with the expectation that they could get a job. And they didn't come here, you know, they just, yeah, let's move to Alberta. And it was, you know, fairly easy for them to get a job. I would expect that most of the people that are coming here now are coming here with some sort of intention. They're not just coming in hopes of finding something, except for that one woman, I guess, who came here from Toronto. that was a different story. But I think most folks are coming here with an intention. And so the fact that we have seen such a strong turnaround in interprovincial migration speaks to some of the momentum that we're seeing in other areas. So this year we're actually looking at, and these numbers don't quite reflect it. We're going to have to revise our numbers for budget, but we're looking at, you know, between 2.5% and 3% population growth this year for the province, which is very strong. I mentioned the federal immigration targets. We are seeing, you know, a few years ago, Alberta's share of immigration fell to a historical low. It's starting to pick up again, and so that's also a good sign. And so our population is really, really important in terms of a good news story for the province. I want to talk about, I don't want to sort of minimize some of the risks that we see out there, because there are a lot. And I know that so far my presentation has been pretty positive, but there are a lot of risks out there. And we've seen that in the confidence numbers. So confidence in the province actually rebounded nicely, but we certainly saw things turn around in the fall. So people became more concerned about higher interest rates, higher costs, how that's impacting their finances, their short-term job prospects, things like that. So we saw that especially through the consumer confidence numbers from the Bank of Canada. We actually just got a new reading this morning, and we did see an uptick for December, which is really positive. But you can tell, you know, we're at confidence numbers that we saw really only during COVID. And so people are concerned about what's happening out there and how they're going to be impacted, especially by higher interest rates. So where do we see inflation? I mean, we tend to take our cues from the Bank of Canada when it comes to inflation. And so we are looking at around between 3.5% is where our forecast is going to be for this year. We have seen some of the affordability measures that were announced, so pausing the fuel tax, the electricity rebates. Those were the big two that actually pull costs down in the province. So that's contributing to lower inflation. We've also seen lower energy prices, which is also helping a lot. I mentioned the core, the trend in core, and that's the same as in other parts of Canada. So core inflation still remains strong. Home builders, replacement costs, which reflects the higher interest rates, has been growing quite a bit. And we've also seen service inflation pretty strong in the province. So, you know, similar trend for Alberta as for other jurisdictions. And like I said, we're looking at around 3.5% is where we think inflation is going to land for this year. And we think that the biggest impact is going to be on the consumer side. And so our expectation, especially Albertans tend to be sort of big purchasers. They like to buy a lot of stuff. We have very high incomes here. And we have seen a pullback on that side on spending. And so our expectation is that this year that especially spending on goods is going to fall to almost, you know, no growth for this year. Pretty much all of our spending is going to be on the services side, because people still tend to, you know, you get a haircut, you go fix your car, you pay for your cell phone. So some of that stuff we think is going to continue to grow, and of course it's supported by our population growth. But really the story is on the goods side, where we think there's going to be quite a bit of a pullback even compared to last year. And so that's where a lot of our weakness is coming in on our forecast is on that retail sales side and the consumer side. I get a lot of questions about our housing market, and this is something that we think is going to support or lend some support this year. And it's quite a different trend compared with other jurisdictions. And so, you know, people, when they think about, of course, the housing market in Canada, they think about Vancouver and Toronto. And of course, we've seen a big pullback in activity and prices in both of those markets. We've also seen a bit of a slowdown in Alberta, for sure. Especially in Edmonton, we saw more of a price correction than in Calgary. But what we're looking at and what we've talked about is the fact that we still see strong population growth. Our affordability remains way, way better than pretty much all of the jurisdictions, especially the bigger jurisdictions. And so we think that, you know, a lot of the correction that we saw, especially on the resale market, so we saw sales come down, we saw prices come down. We think a lot of that's already happened in the province. And so we do think that our housing is going to be quite resilient this year, especially compared with other jurisdictions. And part of that story as well is that heading up to, even up to COVID, so up to, early 2020, Alberta's housing market didn't really do very much. So between 2015 and 2020, even though we saw population growth and things like that, our housing market was pretty flat. So there were a lot of people that were kind of sitting on the sidelines from an activity perspective. Of course, when interest rates really fell during COVID, people came into the market in droves, but we didn't see nearly the same appreciation here that we saw in other jurisdictions. From that sort of rationale, we don't expect to see the same kind of correction that they've seen in other jurisdictions. The other piece that we saw last year especially was on housing starts. We saw record housing starts in the province. A lot of that was driven by multi-unit starts. And so we see, a lot of demand in the rental market and things like that. But nonetheless, those housing starts were really high. And so even heading into this year, our expectation is that we might see a bit of a slowdown in starts, but they're still going to be really strong given our levels of population. The other piece that we've seen is just on the fundamentals. When you look at inventories, when you look at sort of where activity is, in a lot of areas, you can see with the unit sales, this was looking at the dotted line shows where sales were in 2019. And so in a lot of jurisdictions in Canada, sales have fallen below where they were even in 2019. But in Alberta and Saskatchewan as well, they've held up quite nicely. And we're still looking at low inventories. So for us, population growth, affordability, the fact that we have low inventories, and we still see fairly resilient activity suggests to us that our housing market is going to hold up this year. And that's important for our overall outlook, of course. So, we're looking to we'll be updating our housing start forecast for this year, but, in the 30 to 35,000 range is a good number for the province for sure from an activity perspective. This is just kind of a little bit, I wanted to include a couple of slides at the end. I know that the previous premier, they launched talking about Alberta as a place to live, we're affordable, attracting people to the province. And that's certainly the case. We've seen things slow down a little bit. It's taken a long time so finally in 2022, we estimate that GDP recovered back to pre-recession levels. So that was a pretty long recovery that we've seen in the province. But we continue to see high incomes in the province. A lot of high-paying jobs here we expect that to attract people. And then, of course, from an affordability perspective, we've seen challenges, especially in the downtown core, for Edmonton and Calgary and even some of the smaller cities. But that also creates opportunities. So a lot of affordability there. For rental space, for businesses, and for consumers as well. So I think even though there's a lot of risks out there and we have to be aware of those, that we certainly see some positive signs in the economy that we think are going to, as I mentioned at the front, really help us sort of weather some of these challenges that we could be facing this year.
Today, Sean asked me to talk about the Chamber and the benefits that the Chamber of Commerce has for its membership and also what we provide to the community in Strathcona County. So the Chamber has 4 pillars: networking, benefits, events or projects, and advocacy. I'm going to talk about the first 3 a little bit. I think everyone knows a lot of the things that we do here at the Chamber of Commerce in the community with the first 3. But I really am going to concentrate on some advocacy pieces that we're doing right now, because I think those policies that we have developed are going to help shape Strathcona County, help shape the province here and Canada. So it's my pleasure to be able to talk about those things. First, I'll talk about our networking. We do 3 things in networking. We do breakfast networking every Thursday morning. We do 40 of those a year. And in those, I can tell you that just an example, last week, we visited Unita Barbecue member who pivoted during COVID and expanded and are doing quite well. And they're a great success story here in Strathcona County at this time. This week coming up, this Thursday, we have Strathcona County Parks and Recreation, and they're going to talk about the Special Olympics and Alberta Winter Games that are going to be hosted right here in Strathcona County this year, which is a great economic driver for the business community. Next week, we're going to do a member visit to Service Credit Union. They've been a great member of ours for as long as I've been around, and they help out the community in many different ways, providing loans and many different services to the business community. We do network lunches as well. January, we had Edmonton Global speak at our luncheon, and it was very informative of what they're doing to attract business to Canada, to Alberta, to Strathcona County. Economic development works with them hand in hand to make sure that those in international markets know that Edmonton, Strathcona County are available to do many things, and then it's turned over to the economic development partners of the region to attract them and say, you should do your business here. So Edmonton Global is a great part of the success here in Strathcona County. February, it's our pleasure that Honourable Perrin Beattie will speak at our luncheon. Perrin is a good friend of mine, and he's the President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. And he phoned me up in his holidays in Florida and asked me if it was okay if he came out and spoke at our Chamber of Commerce. Obviously, I said yes, and it's going to be a pleasure to have him here. And just kind of a fact here, if you know about the Emergency Act that was enacted in Ottawa last winter, Perrin, when he was part of the Mulroney government, he wrote that act. So when he's here, you can ask him all about it. I've had several phone calls with him over what his thoughts were of how it was enacted and how it played out. So very, very influential guy. March speaker is L'Etape Canada Tour de France in Strathcona County. They're going to announce the route that the bike tour is going to take in Strathcona County this summer at that luncheon, and we're very pleased to be a partner. And thank you, Sean, for setting us up to work with them. Our April speaker is Mayor Rod Frank, the State of the County address. Be right here in this room. Make sure you get a ticket. It's the hottest ticket that day. We do networking after hours mixers as well. And we haven't had any this year to date because we wanted to make sure after COVID that we got our breakfast and our luncheons in good order and that they were well attended. And we also wanted to work with the business community in the hospitality sector because they've struggled a lot over COVID, obviously. And we wanted to make sure that they were okay to go ahead and do this. So this month, we're starting up our after hours mixers. There will be one at 4 Points Hotel on February 7th and at Headquarters Restaurant on February 28th. And we look forward to doing monthly ongoing from then. You may know that we do the business awards here. They were very successful this year. We had hosted them at Festival Place this year, and people were saying that they were the greatest business awards that we had. And a lot of the things that they liked about it was that it was at Festival Place, the flow of the event and the food. Everything was a wonderful evening that night. And we're looking forward to working with Brett Fraser and the people at Festival Place next year as well. The Great Canadian Trade Fair and Sale, it invades Millennium Place every year. It took a little bit of a break during COVID. We did it last year on a smaller scale, but this year we're partnering with Kingsley Events. You may know who they are. They do the Holy Handmade show right here in this Agora. They're going to join us at the trade fair, and they're going to bring even more people to our exhibitors and make it an even bigger community event. Our golf tournaments, we had them during COVID under tight restrictions. We had our first open tournament last June, and it was very successful. It was sold out. We had every activities on all the holes, and it was a great day for networking for everyone. We have our International Women's Day event coming up on March 8th, and that's going to be in council chambers right here in the building. And our committee's working on getting that finished up, so it'll be on our website hopefully by Friday, and tickets will be on sale Friday or Monday. Please, sherwoodparkchamber.com if you're looking for tickets. We have a new event, and it's going to be right here in this room again, and it's going to be on May 13th. We'll make an announcement of what that is in a month or so now, but it's going to be an exciting new event for the Chamber of Commerce. We also have benefits for our membership. We have health benefits. It's the biggest health benefit program in Canada for businesses. There's 33,000 businesses in Canada that buy their health benefits from this, and it's all organized and put through the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We also have commercial home and auto insurance that saves you up to 30% on your insurance needs as a member. So please contact the Chamber if you haven't got a quote on those on your insurance needs. We have a merchant services program for MasterCard, debit, great prices. We negotiated that through the Alberta Chamber of Commerce. I was on that committee that negotiated that, and I can tell you that the debit rate that we have for our members, whether it's a one-person employee business or if it's a restaurant with 150 employees, you'll get 4 cents per transaction for debit, which is unheard of for a small business to get. Usually you have to be a national chain to get those rates. We have fuel discounts as well, and if you have a fleet, there's a good discount on diesel and gasoline purchases and other oil and gas products that you may have. I wanted to jump into the policy. This is what I wanted to talk about the most here today. John Parazak, he's right over here. He's our policy analyst, and he's been with us for 2.5 years and has done a spectacular job. We got him from the legislature, and he's a great person to look into all these different policies that we write for our membership. And these policies could be municipal. We do presentations to the municipal government on their budget and make suggestions on what they can do to help the business community when they're developing their budgets. We also do provincial policy and federal policy. The Alberta Chamber of Commerce is our provincial wing, and then the Canadian Chamber of Commerce is obviously our federal chapter that we belong to that federation as well. So we've developed a new policy. It's called low carbon intensity hydrogen. And what we want to do with that policy is, you've probably heard that people are saying, oh, green hydrogen's the best. Oh, we make blue hydrogen. Well, there's also many other kinds of hydrogen. There's turquoise hydrogen that's made from carbon. There's pink hydrogen that's made through nuclear energy. And there's several other types that are being generated right now too. But what the issue is right now, you may have heard our Prime Minister go to the East Coast and say that he's going to sell green hydrogen to international markets. Well, green hydrogen can be made different ways. Is it really green hydrogen if you're making it with electricity, but that electricity is generated from a coal-fired generation plant? Yes, it still is green hydrogen because it's electrical, but the carbon emissions are higher than they would be for some of the blue hydrogen that's made right here in Strathcona County. So those are the kinds of things that we are trying to advocate for, is don't look at the colors, don't look at the technology, look at the emissions from the start of production of it till the tailpipe of its use. We also have a new policy, low-rank coal in Canada's agricultural emissions reductions, and you may have heard of this too, where the federal government wants to reduce federal or nitrogen, CO2 by 30%. So that's been done all over the world. We're a little late to the gate on this, and it's good for the environment. Well, we also come up with a solution here with a member right here in Strathcona County. There's a product called low-rank coal that you can use to make a fertilizer from that coal, available right in Hannah, Alberta. It's shipped here. Our member here makes this humulite that can be applied to the ground. It can be applied folically, but to get down to the 20% reduction in CO2 emissions, 30%, you have to cut 20% of the nitrogen. This product will replace that 20% of nitrogen so farmers can still have the same productivity. There's amazing stuff that happens right here in Strathcona County. We have an incentive for abandoned well cleanup and reinvest in Alberta. That is, we call it the R-Star policy. We developed that last fall. It's been passed at the Alberta Chambers of Commerce. So what that does is it's an incentive for small oil and gas businesses that maybe their P&L is a little upside down because they have a lot of low producing or abandoned wells that are listed on their P&L, and they go to their bank and they say, well, these are our revenues now and they're declining. And they say, yes, but you have this liability of these wells on your P&L. So we can't get you any more money at this time, or whatever that the business would be looking at. So this R-Star credit is actually a credit that will give you credits to clean up low producing abandoned wells. And that credit that you have, you can apply that to the royalties on new wells. So it's a business solution that's not one that comes from Ottawa that gives the province money here to clean up wells. What it actually does is it allows the businesses in Medicine Hat, Grand Prairie, wherever you are in Alberta, to employ people to clean up wells, drill new wells, and be productive. So it's a great solution for the Alberta economy here, and for those, Mayor Frank, it will help pay the municipal taxes that some of these companies owe. Alberta land titles. If you've sold a house lately, you'll know that it takes over 4 months to get your land titles cleared. That's unacceptable. If you're the person that sells that house, can you imagine 3 months later getting a bill from the municipality because you're the one on the land title ownership for your taxes for a house you sold 3 months ago? This has happened. So what this policy is asking for now that we have written is that they put the technologies in place and the resources needed to get this down to under a 30-day transaction. And this can be done because Saskatchewan and British Columbia right now are less than 2 weeks for land titles. So we're 4 months, those two provinces, 2 weeks. We can do better, and it will help. I see several real estate agents in this room here, commercial and residential, and I'm sure land titles has been a little bit of an issue. And for you to be able to collect your revenues, you have to wait for land titles to clear. So it takes 4 months to get your money. That's a little bit too long for a business to wait for their commissions and fees for lawyers and real estate agents. We've had several policies from Sherwood Park that are huge wins in the province and the federal government. I'll just tell you one. When I moved here when I was on the Chamber of Commerce board, I was on the policy committee. We came up in 2000 a policy where corporate taxes were 15% at that time. Small tax rate was 5%. We wrote a policy and it was adopted in Lethbridge in 2001, where we asked to reduce those rates, and the rates did come down. At one point, the tax rate for corporates was 10%, and it was lowered down to 2% for business tax. That came from Sherwood Park. That policy's been on the books, and we keep whittling away at it. Know that Manitoba and a territory have 0% for small business tax, and that's our goal, is to have the government lower the tax rate for small business to 0, just as it is in Manitoba and it is in Northwest Territories. So those are the wins that we have done, and it helps everyone in this room as a business owner. It helps all the people in the province. It helps people federally. It helps all businesses. So those are the things that we do from an advocacy side of things. And I ask one thing from the group here. If you have something that you can say, call up John, call up myself and say, I have this issue. You know, if the government would just do this, my job would be so much easier, or my business would be that much profitable. Come talk to us. We'll help you make that policy, and we'll try to help you be the better business that the Chamber tries to help every member do. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
First and foremost, thank you everybody for coming today. I think you've got a good cross-section of speakers who really are here today to talk about our local economy, but you know, we're trying to drill it down and get as granular as we can for the group, so that the businesses and the real estate community and our councillors and everybody in this room can get a sense of what this all means at a local level, how this can help your business, how this can really help our local economy grow. And so I was really happy with Catherine when she came up here this morning, because she's a star. She has a lot more credibility than me. And I was a little worried that she was going to say something that maybe didn't jive with what I was going to say, and I would be up here embarrassed. But I'm happy to say that she didn't. And what you're going to hear as we go through my presentation deck here really speaks to more or less what she mentioned, but we're going to really focus it on Sherwood Park and the greater Strathcona County and Edmonton region. And I hope that sincerely the takeaway for the group here is what an amazing thing we have happening here, and really how this can impact you in all these positive ways. So what's our mission? I mean, what's our reason for being? I talk to my team about this from time to time. Why do we get out of bed in the morning? And really it is focused on this. You know, Sherwood Park in Strathcona County attracts innovative entrepreneurs and investors with boundless opportunities available. Through investment attraction, business retention, expansion, and tourism, Strathcona County is the perfect community to do amazing things. And just a little brief note on our shop as I get through here and I start introducing our team. Our office really is divided into those three kind of key areas. Investment attraction is one, and I'll introduce you to the team here in a second. The second would be business retention and expansion, which is really focused on our local existing business community. And the third is really around tourism, which is, I don't want to say a new and exciting part of our portfolio, but something certainly that our elected officials have put a renewed focus on, and something that I believe we're seeing some really exciting things happening in this space. So first of all, I'll quickly introduce our team, our investment attraction team. I think a lot of them are over here, but Stephen, Reed, and Stephanie, if you guys want to just quickly whip up and let everybody see. Great looking group of people here, and these are this is really our investment team. So Stephen is our manager of investment attraction, and he really leads this portfolio for our office. Really, this has a lot to do with driving private sector investment into our community. So whether it be energy companies, whether it be downstream chemical companies, agriculture, the list goes on, and we'll walk through what some of our areas of focus are. But really, Stephen's the one who leads that for our team. As a part of his team, we have Reed and Stephanie, who are actually new hires to the county. They've been with us about 6 months, and each one of their portfolios is a little different. Stephanie, we brought largely to help us focus on our diversification sectors, agriculture specifically. We think we have a huge opportunity in that here in the county. And Stephanie is an expert in that area, so we brought her in really to help with a lot of different sectors, but specific to agriculture. And Reed is our Senior Economic Development Officer, and his focus really is working on investment in our urban area. He's largely been tasked with, you know, updating our communications, updating our website, updating our tools that we have for the businesses in our community and those looking to come into our community. So I would encourage you to talk to them if you have any new interesting business ideas that you'd like to bring to the county. We have a business retention and expansion team. Shane, who's been up here emceeing the event, he's our manager of business retention expansion, and Tara DeMonic, who's over there, who's been walking around with our microphone, helping, really pulled off this whole event. So thank you very much to Tara and Shane. Their focus is really working with you guys, working with the Chamber of Commerce, with Todd, John, and Mike and the team over there to support our local business community. So that we do monthly programming to support you guys. We do a number of things, and Tara and Shane are really the head people on that file. And then really tourism. I mentioned this is not a new area, but a new area on our team. Eilish has been with us for a while now. You know, we brought her in really to focus on Council's 10-year approved tourism strategy, and that strategy really is focused on growing the tourism sector in Strathcona. You know, I know Strathcona County is not typically known as Paris or London or any of these other places, but we obviously see a huge opportunity here with, you know, these amazing tourism assets we have adjacent, like Elk Island and Beaver Hills, and even a lot of things going on in our community. And ironically enough, because our vanity knows no bounds, we always Google to see who's the most popular person on Google in our team, and it is Eilish. So congratulations, Eilish. So really our service is just to kind of bring the point home. I mean, a lot of the things that we do that we can offer, and I guess why we're introducing our team here today, is so that you guys have some friendly faces that you can reach out to and connect with to touch base about some of these services we offer. And so you can see we offer support and coaching one-on-one. We facilitate introductions and business linkages with a lot of our stakeholders, business referrals and connections with local networks. We have a lot of information, research data. So if you're a company or you're in the real estate industry or even in the finance industry, and you're looking for trends, for demographic information, for heat mapping, for traffic counts, for things like that, our office can help provide a lot of that. And as well, the staff I just introduced you to, very trained and knowledgeable with a lot of expertise in a lot of different areas. So if you are looking to connect with us, please do. I hope the takeaway here is that, you know, we are very much looking to connect with you guys so that we can help you really understand what's happening and how it'll affect you at a more granular level. So I guess when it comes to where we're focusing our resources, our time, and our efforts, really it is on some of these targeted growth industries. And you heard Catherine talk about agriculture. She talked a little bit about the traditional oil and gas sector, and she really talked about petrochemicals and hydrogen and how that's impacting our region. And we see that too. We are really focusing our efforts on sectors that we believe we have a demonstrable bench strength in. So something that allows us to leverage existing assets, existing companies, existing subject matter experts in our community, things to that effect. So you can see, and I hope that these seem fairly obvious, because that largely is what we feel we're rooted in. But petrochemicals and hydrogen, you know, I feel like that's, you know, fairly obvious with Imperial and Suncor and even Shell Scotford, you know, implementing petrochemicals into their existing facilities, as well as agribusiness. You know, I like to joke, you know, we should get t-shirts made, you know, it says Strathcona County, you know, energy and agriculture. That's kind of what we're about. So as you know, food security challenges have come up, you know, energy and agriculture specifically have been pretty critical for us. But, you know, whether it's, you know, animal genetics, food production, pulse fractionation, hemp, whatever the case may be, we do have a strong opportunity here. We're seeing a lot of investment in this space. We're seeing a lot of overtures made. You know, one of the primary reasons we brought Stephanie on board was to help, you know, build out and develop that sector. And we're quite excited about that. Advanced manufacturing, you know, as things are produced here, like agricultural products, like polypropylene up in the heartland, plastics, things to that effect, there's a real downstream impact on what can be done and what will happen in Strathcona County. And because of that, we see a huge opportunity in advanced manufacturing. So traditionally, we've been the area of producing things to send places. What we're saying now is we think we can be the place that takes those things and turns them into something that then sends that final product to a consumer ultimately. And I think that's going to generate a lot of economic activity in this area. Transportation and logistics. You guys likely all lived through the construction of the Anthony Henday and everything that went into that. I think it was fairly obvious at the time that good things were coming. Now that you live and you're in the community, you can see, I mean, we are at the cross section of the Anthony Henday, at the cross section of the Yellowhead, very quickly connected to Highway 2. We have, you know, Canadian Pacific and Canadian National main lines running right through our community. It really does give us a great opportunity to you know, create transloading facilities, intermodal facilities to get products out of Strathcona county to markets. And again, we believe that presents an amazing opportunity. And the last, I won't belabor this too much, but tourism. Council did approve a 10-year tourism strategy that we are in, I believe, year 2 or 3 of implementing. And that is really around us kind of help supercharge our tourism sector. And you'll see a little bit about that more in a second here. So I guess what does that all mean? I mean, really, we're seeing a huge transition. We're seeing a lot of, traditional older sectors like maybe upstream oil and gas and maybe commercial farming and things like that, transitioning into kind of a new era, into, midstream chemicals and petrochemicals and hydrogen and things to that effect, as well as value-added agricultural products and manufacturing, the things we mentioned. So this transition time is very exciting for us, and it is something that we're dead in the middle of right now. I don't want to sell a timeshare to you guys. I think it's important that you know that this does not come without challenges. So, a lot of the challenges, and Catherine touched on them, so I won't belabor them any further, but really things like interest rates, global instability, energy crisis, food insecurity, as well as probably for me, the most pronounced challenge that we're facing right now, ironically, is a labor crunch. I know in a lot of your small businesses, you guys are likely feeling it. But when we walk through shortly here, some of these projects that have been announced and projects that we think are going to be developed in this area, I think you're really going to see the massive amount of human potential that we need to mobilize and bring to this region just to facilitate these investments from happening. We're not talking about hundreds of people, we're talking about tens of thousands of people. And I think, Catherine really drove that point home with one of her slides around labor. So with that being said, that is going to be a challenge and something that we are working with industry on to, maybe help overcome that to some extent. So really, as we talk about transitioning and we talk about, what's new, you'll hear me talk about upstream and downstream, oil and gas. And really what I'm talking about is that hydrocarbon molecule. Traditionally, Alberta has been known for taking it out of the ground and upgrading it and refining it into fuels for a combustion engine. That is largely what we've been known for, and largely where the investment has gone to for the last number of decades. What we're going into now is really taking that same hydrocarbon molecule and using it for different things, using it to decarbonize industry in other parts of the world, using it for consumable products. For every vehicle that's being built now that is a Tesla versus a Ford F-150, we may not be combusting that molecule in an engine, but we're certainly using it to make the vehicle lighter so that the battery life lasts longer. So bumpers and things to that effect. That's all happening right here in Strathcona County. And so you're going to see I'm going to be going pretty fast and furious through some of these items coming up. And by all means, stop and talk to me after. But this is the type of thing that we're excited about. You're going to see in a second here, this is what industry is excited about. And you're going to see a lot of interest in this space, not just now, but in the coming decade or more. So I guess just if we're talking about in the news, and I'm going to try to go rapid fire here. I know there's probably a lot of interest in some of this, but Mitsubishi and Shell signed an MOU to collaborate on a hydrogen project here in Strathcona County. Super exciting news. That is, potential for billions of dollars worth of investment in the county. Some of these are in various stages from we have an idea, we want to sign an MOU, all the way to we have shovels in the ground and we're hiring people right now. And you'll see that as we go, but that's one. Another one, Shell and Silicon Ranch to build a $100 million solar farm at Scotford. So Shell Scotford up in Strathcona County. That one is actively under construction right now. That's a 600-acre solar farm that's largely being purpose-built to power parts of the Scotford refinery. What does that mean again? Jobs and tax revenue and everything that comes with that. Inter Pipeline, assessing blue ammonia and blue methanol projects. So Inter Pipeline, as you guys likely know, built the Heartland Petrochemical Complex up in our portion of the Heartland, many years ago. I believe it's being commissioned or been commissioned very recently, and polypropylene is coming out of that facility as we speak. To see them further exploring opportunities in the petrochemical space in our part of the world is very exciting and something we should all, keep a watchful eye on. Air Products. I mean, this one is not necessarily in Strathcona County, but it's right down Sherwood Boulevard in the Orem Business Park. This one is under construction right now, or if the shovels aren't in the ground, maybe they're just waiting for it to thaw. It should be any minute. This is a multi-billion-dollar hydrogen complex that, again, is, you could hit a 3-wood from the Yellowhead and maybe hit it, depending on who's hitting the 3-wood, but super exciting. And the list goes on. Suncor and ATCO potential, partner on a potential world-scale hydrogen project. This, again, is a 3-phase project that, could have a capital investment of up to $10 billion here in our portion of the Heartland. Imperial. I mean, this was big news yesterday, I think, or yes, maybe a few days ago before the weekend, but Imperial announcing that they've made a positive final investment decision for Canada's largest renewable diesel facility. This is a very interesting one in the sense that it really is industry decarbonizing, themselves and moving in that direction. But this has impacts on our agricultural sector as well, because the feedstock now to produce this diesel is not oil and gas. It is now canola and grain and things to that effect. That one is more or less under construction now with some earthwork and civil work being done, but shovels will be in the ground very shortly. Shell proposing a large-scale CCS. And Catherine talked about carbon capture and storage earlier in her presentation. And, for those who maybe aren't familiar, essentially what she's talking about is taking the carbon that's emitting off of these facilities and essentially pumping it into salt caverns that are about 1 kilometer below our feet and storing it for forever, quite frankly, and basically taking it out of our air shed to allow for this industry to develop in a low carbon way. So Shell, in conjunction with ATCO, has announced that they're planning on building a facility like this up in Strathcona County's portion of the Heartland. I can just say Shell has successfully operated North America's first and only facility like this called Quest, where essentially they take about 250,000 vehicles worth of emissions off the road every year through this facility. So very successful and looking forward to happening. And this is the last one. I see our friends from Fort Saskatchewan are here, so I have to shout them out. Dow has announced their plans to build the world's first net zero ethylene and derivatives complex. So, that's a $10 billion investment in and of its own, and will have massive implications on this region. And the reason that these are so critically important, when I throw around numbers like 10 billion this and billion that, I mean, a lot of those dollars are spent here. They aren't spent in other parts of the world. I mean, local procurement is a huge piece connected to some of these government incentive programs and things to that effect. So when we talk about this money coming through and flowing through this region, this isn't just, money that is on paper and it's actually something being built in Malaysia and other parts of the world. A lot of that stuff, like we saw with Inter Pipeline's petrochemical complex, is actually being built right here in Alberta, and in a lot of those cases right here in our region. So super exciting stuff. So $20 billion. I mean, those projects we just listed, I told my team to give me a number that we could get excited about. I actually think it's way higher than this, but again, I don't want to be, too snake oil up here. But just the investments I talked about alone, if even half of them came to fruition, and a number of them are actually actively under construction, this is more or less the capital investment that we would see in this region. And I just wanted to add some context to that for you guys. What actually does that mean? For our purposes, I mean, that's 40 Rogers places. And you can imagine how transformational those investments were to the Edmonton region when those were happening. Imagine if we had 40 of them. That's essentially what we're talking about here. We could keep going. Disney theme park. We had to stat check this, so if it's not right, Steven's the guy to talk to. But apparently one of these theme parks is about $400 million each. So this number that we're talking about, 20 billion, that would be the equivalent of 50 Disney World theme parks in Florida. Imagine if we even had one of those here. Wouldn't that be something? So pretty spectacular. And the last one, I mean, the joke writes itself. I'm not going to say maybe what this is, but this is a very interesting image. And what it is the Amazon HQ headquarters. I'd encourage you to Google it and take a look at it so you can compare it with our funny little vector that we have on the screen. But that's essentially 4 of Amazon's HQ headquarters, which are valued at about $5 billion each. And for those of you who remember at that time when Amazon was looking to site their facility around the world, it was a bit of an arms race for cities around the world who were looking to have a development like this in our community. I remember at the time, the existing Economic Development Organization for the region at the time, EEDC, was jockeying quite heavily to land this, as well as Calgary and quite frankly every city around the world. So I guess just to contextualize that $20 billion number, what that actually means, well, this is what it means. And I think that's a pretty interesting way to illustrate that. So what does that mean for you guys at a local level? It really means jobs, specialized jobs with huge international companies found right here in the community. It really means local business growth and attraction. So we talked about the local procurement, that will be happening here. We talked about, your businesses connecting in with supply chains and things to that effect. We believe it's going to have a massive impact. It also means tax revenue. Tax revenue that is put back into the community for infrastructure and amenities that improve the quality of life. So in Strathcona County, I think we really enjoy a high quality of life here with amazing facilities, trails, rec facilities, things to that effect. For us to continue to facilitate that and to grow and to be the world-class community that we are, this tax revenue from these projects will really help advance our community in that way. So if you have any interest or any questions about some of the stuff we've talked to today, please feel free to connect with anyone on our investment team or to go to strathcona.ca/investment. If you are a local business who is looking to connect into our office so that you can potentially connect with supply chain managers or procurement managers for a lot of these big projects, I would encourage you to reach out to Shane and Tara and our BRE team to really connect in that way, or visit strathcona.ca/business. On the tourism file, if you are, a hotelier, if you're a restaurant owner, if you're someone in the hospitality space, someone who wants to get into the hospitality space or has a great idea, to rent canoes or rent bikes or do something to that effect, I'd strongly encourage you to talk to Eilish and Shane as well, or go to strathcona.ca/tourism. I would also say our 10-year tourism strategy is a really interesting read and something that's quite aspirational and something we have full plans on delivering. So if you have any interest in that and you want to take a read, feel free to go to strathcona.ca/tourism. Really the area of focus for that is really around nature-based culinary, agritourism, cultural, and sports tourism. So those were the areas that we thought we had the most potential benefit in. I'll whip through this last couple slides here, but just some upcoming events that are exciting for our community. The Special Olympics Alberta Winter Games, those are coming up, tomorrow, next month, February 24th to the 26th. We have monthly business seminars. You're at one now. You might not have even known it, but we have those going on every other month for the rest of the year. And we cover a broad range of topics, from helping your business navigate the online transition, helping your business understand, key trends and things, whether it's, tax litigation, whether it's accounting, bookkeeping services, things like that. Every month we have a different topic. And again, keep your eyes out on what we have going there. Our supply chain forum, which we're putting on with a number of our regional colleagues as well as our Chamber of Commerce and the like, is probably one that I think is most of interest to a lot of companies here. This event will be happening right here at the Agora on April 5th. And all these companies that I flagged as I was going through and clicking here, we plan on having them all here. There's their procurement teams, their supply chain teams to be in this room. We will encourage you to register and come. And really it will be your opportunity to come and find out how you can connect into these projects so that when they are built and they need services like laundry services, signage, catering, muffins, things like that, engineering services and the like, that you guys have a means to an end and that you're directly plugged into their supply chain versus going through government offices and the like. And then our tourism conference, May 3rd. Again, I believe in this room, Eilish, is that right? Drawson Rec Center, thank you very much. She gets mad because I say stuff and it's wrong, but I appreciate that. Drawson Rec Center on May 3rd. And again, if you have an interest in the tourism space and you want to connect into that and understand where you fit and how you can get involved, I would encourage you to do that. And then we have a few really exciting tourism opportunities. Ravenwood Music Festival, June 23rd. I think we all know about that. La Tap, I'll take a second just to talk about that. This is a super exciting new event that's coming to Strathcona County. It's an official Tour de France event, but unlike maybe Tour of Alberta or other things, it's not a professional event. It's a mass participation amateur cycling event with a real pro experience. So the yellow jersey, the finish line, the museum, the champions dinner, the whole thing. So if you guys have an interest in that, I would strongly encourage you to register to not only cycle, but maybe to come out and support the athletes. And then Savor on September 10th, that is our food festival, to put it simply. Really, we have local restaurants come out, and it's a bit of a food and music festival. We've brought in a lot of local artisans and musicians and things like that, and it's been growing year over year for the last while. So I would strongly encourage you to come to that. This is some of our contact information. I think I'll just one last time, if you're on my team, put up your hand, please, so everyone can see you. We got a bunch of people here, so please feel free to connect with any one of them. I can attest they're all amazing people, maybe one or two dodgy ones, but for the most part, pretty good. Happy for you guys to connect. And lastly, I'm going to leave you with just this really video, just to give you a sense of what's happening in our community and what our office does. And so I think I have the ability to press play, or Richard, you're going to press play. Richard will press play, and thank you very much.
Starting a business here in Strathcona County was a real advantage, a leader in their business development.
Really is a partnership.
There's quite a bit of things that just make it pleasant for farming in Strathcona County.
The first and foremost thing that you need for success is that hard work. Strathcona County, along the way has definitely helped smooth that path.
Strathcona County really go to great lengths to support those businesses and ideas that come from their people. They treat everyone like family.
Coming to work's like coming to my second home. Strathcona County is an amazing place to work. There's a huge community of entrepreneurs and business leaders. There's an endless amount of support and resources. Everybody treats you like you're their neighbor.
I've recently seen many startups set their bases up in Strathcona County. That's mainly due to the easy access of talent, connections, and opportunities. I really see the tech sector in Strathcona County growing in the coming future.
Having an office in Sherwood Park has actually been a benefit for attracting certain high-level people.
That's what makes it such a great place here. It's a large group, but they treat you like it's not this huge corporation.
Having in Strathcona County meant things like lower taxes, better access to business programming, better supports for our business throughout, both in the startup and the growth stages, so that we knew that we'd always have those supports there, and things that ultimately affect your bottom line is never going to be a bad thing.
So for me out in the county, there's a lot of space, which has been nice because it's helped us be able to grow our business.
The whole process with the county themselves was very easy. Everything was very streamlined from the starting of applications to permitting. Everyone was absolutely amazing to deal with.
The county is really, really involved in getting everything together for you, just making sure that you can succeed as a business. That's why we chose to stay here and why we want to run our business here.
We look to a hub like Strathcona County to provide people, businesses, and other solutions so that we can help run our site here. That is transformational in terms of how you can run a facility like this. The other thing that Strathcona County does really well is has an open door policy. We have a good relationship where we can bring concerns from both sides.
This is our home. Everything is pretty close. We're close to all the major locations. So I think in that sense, Strathcona County has been amazing for this business.
Having access to good infrastructure, having quick access to the Anthony Henday, the roads are well maintained when we come through Strathcona.
We have great access to pipelines, as well as to a really great workforce that we can draw on for our business.
It makes it easy to operate a business.
You're close to the city, you're close to schools, you're close to all the things that you enjoy.
The great thing about Strathcona County is that it's very community involved.
There's a lot of reinvesting in the community that I've seen.
People want to live here and they want business to grow.
I've lived here for many years. We have great access to great schools, to shopping. It's a safe community to live in.
Great place to live, great people. This is home.
I'm so thankful for the county. This is everything how I provided for my family.
You can.
You can.
You can.
You can.
You can.
You can in Strathcona County.